We're going to welcome to the show now Democratic strategist and former House Armed Services Committee counsel Jamie Jackson and Republican strategist Gabe Grossman. Great to see both of you. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, Jamie, I'm going to start with you. Sanders and AOC taking turns bashing the influence of outside money in Michigan's Democratic Senate race. Take a listen to this.
We can choose $50 million and counting in dark money trying to buy the state of Michigan. Or we can choose Dr. Abdul El-Sayed.
It is about democracy versus oligarchy. This is an election between Abdul and the billionaire class.
All right, will this issue influence Michigan voters?
This may have some influence on Michigan voters, but ultimately, at the top of mind for Michigan voters is cost of living. Michigan voters need to put someone in office who's going to be able to beat Mike Rogers and ultimately stand up against the Trump administration. Yes, what's happening right now with outside spending has been a big issue in this election cycle. We've seen it in other states such as Maryland, New York, Colorado, but ultimately I think voters are concerned about cost of living right now.
All right, and Gabe, the winner is expected to face Republican Mike Rogers come November. How does Rogers and other Republican candidates counter the growing progressive movement around the country? It can't be ignored.
Yeah, it can't be ignored at all. You can't look at this race in a vacuum. We're seeing it all over the country. And yes, cost of living is one of the most important issues for all voters in the United States. But we have to do better than voting these socialists. And we know El-Sayed is not technically part of the DSA, but he's endorsed by them and supported by them and holds very, very similar views. We must do better than this. From a Republican perspective, the Republicans would rather face El-Sayed because he's a better candidate to go after in a general election. So they're right on that. The Stevens campaign is correct on that. She's better positioned to beat the Republican in the general election in November. But from a broader perspective, from an American perspective, this is a big problem we're seeing around the country. It's the loss of the Democratic Party. It's not a win for anybody on any side of the political aisle.
Jamie, I'll let you respond to that. El-Sayed spoke to News Nation's own Mills Hayes about the future of the Democratic Party. We'll roll the tape and you can respond on the other side.
I don't care about the future of the Democratic Party. I care about the future of Michiganders, and our campaign represents that future. We want to get money out of their politics, put money back in folks' pockets, and pass Medicare for all. That's the future Michiganders need and deserve. That's the future we're fighting for. And I think if more politicians stopped thinking about the future of a party and started thinking about the future of the people that they represent, I think we'd make a lot better decisions, and we might actually find a future that the party needs and deserves.
How do you feel? Agree or disagree, Jamie?
The Democratic Party is very diverse, ethnically, racially, demographically, and with policy. And so ultimately, it's going to be up to the Michigan voters to decide who they want to send forward. But I think this is being very overblown. I mean, look at 2018 when a young AOC defeated a 10-term incumbent, the sitting Democratic caucus chair. There was all this concern that she was going to come in along with members of the squad and create havoc, but ultimately she worked with Democratic leadership to pass bipartisan legislation. And so while there may be some disagreements across the full spectrum of the Democratic Party, ultimately I think, again, voters want somebody who's going to stand up against the Trump administration.
Well, kind of the poster child for the Democratic Socialist Party right now, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, and he says he is looking into if his administration could arrest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he plans to visit the city for the UN General Assembly come this fall. So that's just right around the corner, too. Regardless if Mamdani can legally do this or not, what steps can Republicans take to stop the growing anti-Israel stance on the far left? Gabe.
I mean, the Republicans just need to offer a better offering to the American people, and we're seeing it. We saw it with the vote last week with 103 Democrats voting with Thomas Massie to cut off aid to Israel. By the way, and 10 more voted present. That's over 50% of the Democratic members of Congress, which is a big problem. Mamdani barking like he's going to be able to arrest Netanyahu. The United States is not even a member of the ICC. He cannot do it. I mean, unless there's going to be a civil war in the United States, and we're not going that direction. The NYPD is not going to do that. Jessica Tisch, who's the commissioner, is not going to move forward in that. But the the goal that Mamdani is trying to achieve, he's achieving right now, which is to get people to talk about it, whether or not he can arrest Netanyahu. He's trying to continue to rev up his base. And to Jamie's earlier point, the opposite conclusion, right? AOC did win that election, and she did wreak havoc, and she did continue to create this democratic socialist far left wing of the party, and we're seeing it everywhere, including in New York City.
Well, Gabe, I'm going to stick with you for another second. Jamie, I'll circle back momentarily. But what about the divide among conservatives as well and their support for Netanyahu?
So it's a great question. In the Republican Party, there is a divide outside of office, right? If you're talking about the Tucker Carlsons of the world, the Candace Owens of the world, then we need to fight aggressively and vociferously against those movements. But there's not one Republican congressman that voted with the outgoing Thomas Massie in this last initiative. The same thing happened in the vote last year, or there were several last year, right? So it is an issue in the Republican Party and conservative movement more specifically. And the goal of people that are more mainstream, which is everybody in Congress and the entire Senate, is to keep those voices outside of office.
So, Jamie, back to you. With Mamdani floating the idea of arresting Netanyahu in New York City when he's here in the fall, is that a tactic to get under President Trump's skin somewhat? And what do you make of this growing divide in your party toward Israel and Netanyahu?
Well, I think whether you agree with Mamdani's policies or like him or not, one thing he's done is make good on his campaign promises. And he campaigned on this. He said when he ran for office that if Netanyahu came, he would explore this type of action. And so I think that's what he's doing here. Now, there is some question about whether he has the legal authority with regard to jurisdiction or any type of diplomatic immunity. This would likely be something for the federal government to handle. However, I think he wants to make the message clear that he intends to make good on his campaign promises.
Gabe, final word from you.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is ludicrous. First of all, bus prices keep going up. He's not making buses free. He's not following through on campaign promises. And it turns out we are a nation of laws. And Mamdani cannot start enforcing a foreign court, an international court that the U.S. is not a member to the treaty of that court, and try to activate the NYPD. There's also an issue with immunity for the United Nations, and that's why we host the United Nations inside of New York City, and we give immunity to all leaders that come in there. So the idea that we'd have anybody defending what Mamdani is doing because that's a campaign promise is really just an indication of where we are as a country. The big tent argument that the Democrats are trying to push forward to try to include the Democratic Socialists in their party is really the end of the Democratic Party. And like I said earlier, it's a loss for all Americans.
All right, both of you, thank you so much for joining us to weigh in on some of our top stories today. We always like to do that and get the take from both sides of the aisle. So, Jamie and Gabe, appreciate it.